In 1597, 32 years into his reign as King of Scotland, and 6 years prior to the Union of the Crowns, James VI published Demonology, a philosophical dissertation that details his personal beliefs on, among other things, necromancy, sorcery, astrology, possession, fairies, spectres, charms, and the devil. But it was his views on witchcraft in particular that caught the popular imagination, and indeed that same year Scotland saw the second of its 5 great witch hunts. And perhaps the most central figure of that particular witch hunt was Margaret Aitken of Abbots Hall, soon nicknamed the Great Witch of Balwearie, who was accused of witchcraft in Kirkcaldy in April of that same year. Under the threat of excruciating torture, she quickly pleaded guilty, but faced with being put to death, she offered her captors something that they just couldn't resist. Margaret, it was claimed, could tell if any person brought before her was a witch just by looking them in the eye. And for the next 4 months, with the express approval of the King himself, Scotland's leading witch-finders toured the country with Margaret in tow, resulting in hundreds of innocent men and women being condemned to death on her say-so alone. But as the nationwide hysteria began to subside and suspicions grew, a sceptical prosecutor took a group of those found guilty by Margaret the day before, dressed them in different clothes, and presented them before her again. When she declared their innocence, she was once again taken into custody, and the Great Witch Hunt of 1597 was fatally undermined, with Margaret returned to Fife to be burned at the stake. And maybe, somewhere in that tale, there's a lesson about engaging in witch hunts and letting yourselves get carried away. Whilst a week ago on this podcast we didn't accuse Barry Robson of being unable to repeat the Lord's Prayer in Gaelic or having had carnal relations with the devil, we did cast aspersions about his ability to manage in the Championship, and he cast them right back again yesterday as he oversaw a comfortable 2-0 win over an in-form Partick Thistle at Starks Park. This is the Oh No 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 podcast, and I'm sure you'll all be delighted that this is the last post-match episode of October, so I can stop doing the daft spooky stuff. But joining me tonight to talk through a win that very few people saw coming, it's Alan Douglas Munn. First of all, how are you, Alan?
I'm good, mate. I'm glad I'm the only one who was totally 100% behind Barry Robson last week. Didn't say a bad word about him, and nobody can prove otherwise. But yes, I'm really good.
There's definitely not 2 hours and 8 minutes of evidence from last Sunday. And also with us tonight, we've got Ally Pilmer as well. How are you, Ally?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm definitely much better than I was last week when I was probably also ready to burn somebody at the stake.
Yeah, it's nice to be in a kind of jolly mood. I felt sure we were going to have to be bemoaning all sorts of bits and pieces and all this kind of stuff, and actually it turned out to be a really, really enjoyable afternoon. Which also meant that we could save this recording for the evening. We didn't have to start early in the day for fear that it would run on for hours and hours. We should hopefully be able to be, by our own standards, a little bit more kind of succinct tonight. Just one change to the starting 11 for this one, but a fairly significant change to the overall setup, the overall kind of approach. So Paul McMullen came back into the lineup with Jay Rowe dropping out, but Barry Robson moved to a back four from the start with Ross Matthews and Sean Byrne sitting in the midfield behind a three of Dylan Easton, Scott Brown and Paul McMullen, with Jack Hamilton up front. Now, Alan, we'll obviously talk about the way the game unfolded in due course, but on an overall kind of macro level, do you think that the improved performance was primarily down to those changes?
It's certainly a big factor in it, and when you, in terms of you have players playing in kind of positions that come maybe more naturally to them, and allow you to get the best out of them. I mean, you'd argue Scott Brown isn't necessarily a natural number 10, but I think I've always probably thought of him as more of an attacking midfielder than maybe some others do. I don't see him as being quite that defensive midfielder. Because he is really effective at getting forward when he's on form. So he felt more natural in that position than maybe others have tried to shoehorn in there. And as I saw someone kind of comment on Twitter, it kind of stops him and Ross Matthews tripping over each other. Not that they ever actually have literally tripped over each other, but they do tend to be going for the same balls, which leaves gaps. It allows them just to all play their natural positions. And yeah, I mean, you could make a case for saying that, right of a back three is Jordan Doherty's best position. I think you can make a case for saying many different positions are his best positions. He's just really good wherever he plays. And probably unlucky again on Saturday not to be, you could make a very good case for saying he was second choice in the man of the match again, if not first. I thought, so just it allowed everyone to kind of play the way they want to play.
Yeah, I think the point with Scott Brown in particular it's exactly that. It was what you said there about, I don't think he's playing in that kind of number 10 is necessarily the job you would pick for him above everything else. But the difference on Saturday was that was so very clearly his job and nobody else's. Mm-hmm. That he just looked a little bit like he was almost kind of let off the leash and able to go and do it to the best of his abilities. Ally,
would you see him there in the centre half?
yeah, definitely. Ally, would you agree that the kind of midfield was where this game was won and lost, or would you go elsewhere?
Yeah, I think that was kind of a point I was going to make. Was that I thought I think Barry Robson went for the kind of 4-2-3-1. One, because I think he has finally admitted he's had to change something in the system. And two, I think it was to match up Partick, because they kind of also play that 4-2-3-1 with Litsosa and Oisin Smith in front of that three. Sorry, behind that three. And I thought it was to try and flood that midfield and kind of take them on at the front foot. And the word my dad used for our midfield was it was much more coordinated than it has been.
Yes.
You knew exactly what Sean Byrne was going to do, knew exactly what Ross Matthews was going to do, and then they knew that it gave Brown licence to roam so that he could drop back and double up with Matthews and hassle Harry when he needed to, or just have licence to go forward. So yeah, I think it was a good tactical decision from Robson, in fairness, even if it was one that it was like glaringly obvious he needed to make.
Yeah, I've got exactly the same thing down here in terms of matching up to Thistle. I think it was what Robson kind of needed to do anyway. We've obviously been banging on about needed to make a change in the midfield. This was also, I think, perfectly timed. And to an extent, it'll be interesting to see whether he does exactly the same thing again next week. Because obviously Morton will be a different proposition. But particularly the way that Thistle have that midfield three, as you say, Oisin Smith in particular, he kind of hangs back, and then you've got Stanway and Litsosa, both are happy to kind of push on. And I actually thought it was like a little bit, it was to nowhere near the same degree, but it was like a little bit of a mirror of last week, where we had Brown and Matthews, but we'd almost sat them directly into Charlie Gilmore and Hamilton. I've forgotten his first name. Doesn't matter. Chris Hamilton. It was a little bit like that. It meant that in this game, Byrne and Matthews knew from before kickoff, knew that their job was to cancel out Litsosa and Stanway. And that worked. And I think that really kind of nullified Partick Thistle. And then just to slightly take another kind of general point before we really get into it, and it's more of a Thistle one, really. Alan, were you expecting more out of Logan Chalmers and Aidan Fitzpatrick yesterday?
Yeah, it kind of felt like But I mean, I think we stifled him a little bit. I mean, our entire back four, I thought, were to a man outstanding yesterday. I thought they all did their jobs really, really well. Kind of, they knew what their role was, what position they should be in the pitch. They backed each other up as well when they had to, and between them and then Barner and Matthews, they weren't able to get enough support forward for Chalmers and Fitzpatrick when they did get the ball in those channels. So we did to Chalmers what so often is done to Dylan Easton. When he did get space, there tended to be two of our guys out there with him. So I thought we just limited Thistle a lot from our really good defence.
Yeah, definitely. That Chalmers to me looked like Dylan Easton does a lot. Actually, I completely agree with what you've just said there. Like, still looked dangerous, but was being sort of nullified effectively. Whereas Fitzpatrick, I thought, just had a bad game. Didn't seem to be. Even the couple of times in the highlights where you see Thistle are really getting down the left hand side, Paddy Reddin's doing more of the work, more of the damage almost. Not to mention Fitzpatrick getting mugged off by Jordan Doherty, which might bring up multiple times as we go through. Going into the game itself, so at kickoff, immediately from kickoff, the ball gets knocked back to Josh Ray, and he launches it a good 60 yards, nowhere near Jack Hamilton. Ali, with that as a kind of an opening salvo, did you fear the worst there?
Oh yeah, definitely. Josh Ray's kicking is bizarre because I don't think I've seen him kick the ball once exactly where he wants it to go. somehow we always manage to keep it in play roughly, just about. But I thought we maybe looked a wee bit skittish right from the get go, and I was a bit worried. But to be fair, Partick didn't exactly take advantage of that. So, and then I was going to say, actually, immediately after that, it was ourselves that set the tempo. We got on the front foot, which is what's been missing the last couple of weeks. And I think that again came back to the system that we were playing. And so, I was very worried in the first minute and then actually settled down quite well.
Yeah, I don't know if that was like a 4D chess, like deliberate misdirect, but like I was misdirected. Just from the very beginning, I was like, oh, here we go again. He's not learned anything. And then, basically didn't do that again for the next 15, 20 minutes. It all kind of really settled right down. Just on that point about Josh Ray, it's a little bit like him and Kevin Dabrowski. They're like polar opposites in approach, but actually their output's not anywhere near as far apart. Like, Josh Ray looks like he's like the most confident guy with the ball at his feet, whereas Kevin Dabrowski looked like he'd never kicked a football before in his life. But actually, the result is nowhere near as like polarised as that.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly, as you say, in the opening kind of 15, 20 minutes, the Rovers really did, set the tempo, set the kind of direction of the game. And I mean, it must be the strongest we've started the game in a good while, because even, when we played Arbroath, we beat them 3-0. That was all after half time. First half, we never really get going at all. I wanted to kind of pull out the first chances on the highlights, because I think it really illustrates a point you made, Alan, about players playing in their own positions. So it starts off actually with Josh Ray with the ball at his feet, and he knocks the ball out to Jordan Doherty, who plays in a little 1-2 with Paul McMullen. And I'm not going to try and like oversell this. Like, Paul McMullen is just on the right wing and plays a little easy kind of side foot pass, but he's where he would want to be. And then Jordan Doherty, to your point about where is he most comfortable, possibly everywhere, when he receives that pass back, just drives into the middle. But then he's got an out ball, he's got Dylan Easton out wide in a lot of space, and when he puts the ball out to him, Dylan Easton is then where he wants to be, which is squared up against the fullback, who is sort of backpedaling and going into his own box. And I mean, in the end, Easton gets a shot away, and it's relatively tame, and the goalkeeper doesn't jump out the way, which is a crucial point that we'll come back to. But it's kind of a sign of things to come. And as it was a move that didn't really require anybody to do anything that they don't want to do, if that makes sense. It was kind of a natural move, and it turned into a very kind of promising attack. So as you say, that opening period, the Rovers, I thought, played really well, opened up really well, and it was very much a case of all the things that, personally, that I was hoping to see. I think, as you said, went into the game with a pretty negative mindset and was kind of ready, especially after that first 10 seconds, to be mumping and moaning and pointing out the things I didn't want to see. But it was the kind of polar opposite of that. But after that opening period, it did feel like they kind of ebbed away again a little bit after about 20 minutes or so. Alan, could you... Well, I mean, first of all, feel free to disagree with that if that's not how you saw it. But if you do agree with that, could you kind of put your finger on why?
No, I agree with everything you've said. Started off really well. That little move with Jordan Doherty was just... It was him... It was a sign of things to come from him in that game. I thought he just... played, as I mentioned already, he played really well. I think essentially what happened is Partick Thistle are a very good championship team. They are going to have spells where they're putting you under pressure, and to beat a team like Partick Thistle, you're going to have to be able to cope with them coming at you for a while, and defend well and be organised and try and get out when you can, but just try and soak that pressure up. And I know Mark Wilson kind of talked about in his interview about how his very short interview, actually, I think it was like a minute and 10 seconds or something like that. He talked about how they were well in control then, and they thought they looked more likely. It's a funny thing because they had a lot more territory and possession, so you could argue they were in control of the ball. But I don't think they were necessarily in control of the match, because it never really felt like we were in any danger. We didn't. I can't think of any time during that where you're like, oh God, it's coming. And there's been plenty of times this season where you've been sitting going, it's coming, and it normally did come, to be honest. Whereas then I kind of felt they had control of the ball, but we were still in control of what we were doing, and it didn't feel that dangerous. And it was just one of those natural things that happens in a championship match, that a team like this are going to get some time on the ball.
Yeah, it's... Again, I was obviously still had my negative hat on. Like, as we got up to half-time, I was starting to get a wee bit concerned almost. It was like, they hadn't really created anything, but because the whole game had moved, and they had that territory, you're looking at it and going, like, Chalmers is still there, Fitzpatrick's still there. They will get chances, but they never really did. They never really came. And again, I think a large part of that is down to the midfield. And again, Barry Robson needs credit for the way that he set it up, because I think it really did cancel out a lot of the way that Thistle want to play. I think they know they've got a lot of what I think we've been trying to do this season, haven't managed, which is that kind of high energy midfield where you've also got a nice amount of technical ability as well. That if Fitzpatrick goes and he realises he's in a blind alley and he turns back, he's going to have options. He's going to have guys there who are moving and they can pass it about. And yesterday, they never really had the second pass because Byrne was there and Matthews was there. Ally, getting in at half-time at 0-0, did you feel like that? Did you feel like it was maybe a case of like we'd started okay and we'd fallen away? Or were you kind of confident that it was a good foundation for the second half?
I was a wee bit worried because I thought towards the end of the half, whilst we were dealing with Partick enough, we were regressing to just putting it long and hoping that Jack Hamilton was somewhere up beyond the halfway line. And it was also one of those ones where we started well, we set the tempo, we had a couple of half chances, but we still weren't creating like really clear-cut gilt-edged chances. We didn't go 1-0 up, and I was like, I was worried that was it. And were we going to then allow Partick to come out and dominate the second half? And they did. I know we were saying that they didn't look like scoring that much, but Chalmers had that kind of half-hearted header at the back post. And they had another one where I think it was Stanway and Fitzpatrick worked it in the left and he put a ball across. Stevenson was there and he cleared it. And that was fine. But there's just a couple of moments where I was thinking, if they get a kind of undeserved goal, does the floor fall in? That was what I was worried about. So it was all about how we started the second half, really, for me.
I think that, I mean, it's a nice hypothetical to be able to talk about because it didn't happen. But Alan, given the way the Rovers played yesterday, do you think the floor would have fallen in if we'd gone behind in that game? Or do you think, given the level of performance was so much higher than it had been, that we might have dug our way back in it?
Like you say, it's difficult to deal in hypotheticals, but you've got to imagine the confidence, although they probably built up a fair bit of it during that first half, it was probably still fairly fragile, and certainly the patience of the fans, wouldn't have withstood a Thistle goal, I don't think. I think, even though we had played better, just because of what's going on in the last few weeks, I think the place would have got quite nasty if they'd scored just before half time. The last thing you want is the Rovers players going off at half time to a chorus of boos, which I think in normal circumstances, if you lose an unlucky goal just before half time when you've played really well, you'd be like, damn it, come on guys, we're doing really well. Whereas I think just because of what has gone before it, the fans would have just lost it.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was quite good to hear just the level of positive response at halftime. Just because it was 0-0, I think. I wasn't expecting it, almost. Like, I don't know, I was just expecting to be slightly more muted than it was, but it felt like a real reflection of what had happened in that first half, which wasn't so much that the Rovers had been so much better than Thistle. I think 0-0 was broadly fair at halftime, but the Rovers had been so much better than they had been recently, and it felt like a reflection of that. And first goal was always going to be crucial, and certainly would have been a very different game had we gone behind. But 10 minutes after halftime, the Rovers do take the lead. There's a long ball in here, not turned into Pep Guardiola's Barcelona just yet. It is kind of lofted into the channel. I think it's Jordan Doherty who kind of bangs it into the air. As it comes down, Paul McMillan does very well to hold off Paddy Redding, and kind of inexplicably also Dan O'Reilly, who's gone over just to keep an eye on the two of them. When Paul McMillan does, though, he just kind of digs the ball out for Jack Hamilton. He, I think, does really well just to lay it off to Scott Brown. It's almost like in the manner of a rugby team. Like, he knows we've got a man over, so he's not thinking about turning towards goal, which is a thing that I think we probably criticised Jack Hamilton for quite a lot. But in this instance, he's dead right. He just keeps the ball moving along to Scott Brown, and Scott Brown does exactly the same thing. Just make sure that he's getting the right weight on the pass across to Dylan Easton. Easton then, very charitably, he cuts inside and waits for the entire Thistle defence in midfield to flood into the box, and then just sips the ball into the goal anyway. So, Ally, does the goalkeeper just jump out the way of this? Is that what happens?
I think yes, that is what ends up happening. I think that he thinks that Easton is going to try and bend it around that massive players, your Macbeths and whoever are there. I think he thinks he's going to bend it to the far corner. And Easton doesn't. Easton kind of wraps his foot around it a bit more, whether it's intentional or not, and just sort of hits it in his general direction, at which point Clark is gone. And I don't know, Macbeth lets it go between his legs or past him. It was just a really weird goal. From the south stand, I just assumed it had taken a deflection. I assumed that Easton had gone for that far corner and it had come off a Partick player and wrong-footed the goalkeeper. I didn't realise that the goalkeeper had just buggered it, really.
That was exactly the same. Like, it just like that has to have taken a deflection because of the fact that the boys could, like, it's gone through legs and the keeper is out the way. But yeah, I think it possibly does actually just go clean through. Alan, given the criticism that you and I, amongst others, have labelled recently at the varying attacking units and the kind of creativity and all that kind of stuff that we've seen from the Rovers, nice to see a goal that involved all four kind of attacking players that we had in the park at that time.
Yeah, it's really what you want. Is you want them all kind of getting involved and kind of being in the right place to kind of make themselves available for their teammates and what have you. And it's something we've just not seen. We've seen at East End Park last week. You're Dylan Easton getting the ball, turning in, and there's absolutely nobody there. So to have, Jack Hamilton as well has had times where he's been completely isolated up there, and so to have supporting players kind of making the run, and I think kind of going back to what we mentioned earlier, I think Scott Brown plays a big part in that because he what you can never accuse Brown of is lacking in energy. He does put himself around the pitch. It's one of the reasons Barry Robson, always picks him, and to have that energy kind of in the right area of the pitch and kind of bringing others in with him, I think made a real difference. I've just actually watching the highlights again now just to see if I was right. And no, he's still in the. I was thinking maybe the goalie would be having a word with his captain who won the toss and decided to shoot for us to shoot to the south stand in the first half, which then resulted in their goalie having the sun in his face for the full second half. But just looking there, it looks like he was maybe just in the shadow, so I don't think the sun was a factor for the goal. He was just totally sold a dummy by Dylan Easton.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Scott Brown's only where he is because of the change that Robson's made. Yeah. I think if that's last week and that same thing develops, you've got Brown and Matthews both there, but both starting 10, 15 yards deeper and possibly having a little glance to say, am I going or are you going? But actually, as that move starts, or as McMullen's got the ball, Brown's further up the park than Easton is because he's just, again, he knows the job he's doing. He's just got one job, right? I'm the number 10. I know where I need to be. And again, does exactly what you want him to do in that role as well.
Absolutely. And I suppose last week we were very much, the players weren't free from criticism, but it was most of the criticism was very much aimed at Barry Robson. The flip side of that this week is, yes, the players have to get credit for playing the way they played, but you also do have to give Barry Robson the credit he deserves for making the changes and sending them out there with a clear plan, which they actually seem to understand this week and which they stuck to.
I think Barry Robson deserves a lot of credit for this one. And I was thinking this during the game when it was still 0-0 and thinking we could still lose this. The Thistle are a decent side. They could score a goal at any point. Still at that point thinking Robson deserves a lot of credit. Deserves a lot of credit for the way he's put them out. They look like a much better unit. And maybe it's a bit kind of harsh to make this point after a really good win, but I actually don't think over the piece and compared to how they would have wanted, I don't think either Jack Hamilton or Paul McMullen had particularly brilliant games. But I think this again, though, kind of comes back to the same point of, the manager's only got so many players available to him, right? He doesn't have Chin, who's competition for those places, doesn't have Vaughan, who's competition for those places. So if he puts those guys out, and he puts them out in a system that doesn't quite work, and then they just, for whatever reason, don't happen to have a brilliant game, then that's not his fault. He just has to that's unfortunate. That's just football. But what happens is when he does put the rest of the team out in a really kind of a system that makes sense and that other players are playing in their natural positions. Actually, you don't need these guys to be amazing. Like, I think Hamilton, McMullen, 7 out of 10 yesterday, maybe. But they both play a big part in that first goal. It's felt in previous weeks like we needed 2 or 3 guys in the other half to be 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 just to get something out of the game. And that, I think, is where it's felt a bit frustrating, because it felt like the players needed to overperform to make up for some of the decisions that the manager had made, when actually it was the opposite yesterday. I mean, actually, on that point, Ally, am I being a wee bit harsh on Paul McMullen and Jack Hamilton there?
I actually think 7 out of 10 is... I think you could make a case it's generous for Paul McMullen. I think he just had an off day. Like, things went... I mean, I know he had a hand in the first goal with a little flick on, so he was good in spells, but when I saw the lineup and I saw that McMullen was out in the wide right, I thought that's where we're going to get the Paul McMullen that we've been wanting to see, and he basically we didn't get that. But I would still argue it's better than when we play him in a front two and he ends up drifting back and forth, whatever. To be fair to him, when he came off, he looked really frustrated and gutted, and I don't mind that, because I think it shows that he cares. And I think it was just a bit of an off day, and we need to persist with him in that position.
Yes.
Jack Hamilton, he's a bit of a conundrum at the moment, because he does all of the extra stuff that a forward can give you quite well, but he's never in the box. To be fair, if McMullen's having a poor game and he's not putting the ball in for him to be there, there's an argument, then he never gets a cross off Easton, because Easton's going to shoot every time. But the stat that I've put about, and I'll say it again, and it's for people to ponder, is that Jack Hamilton has 1 goal in his last 18 league games. That is not good enough.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is an obvious thing to say.
That's 2 a season. That's 2 a season.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's half a season.
Yes. I mean, yesterday I thought it was all right, but over the long term, we're not getting what we need out of Jack Hamilton, which is ultimately, for a number 9, goals.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, it's a nice segue into the second one, because Jack Hamilton might have 1 goal in his last 18, but Paul Hanlon has 2 in whatever must be his last 4 or something like that. 2 in his last 5? Whatever, he scored twice this season. Following up his what was kind of the inside of his right knee, I think, that he put in the first against Arbroath. This one's he's deftly sweeping home a volley, if you'll let me call it that, with his right foot. So this is the corner comes in. Must be 10, 15 minutes after the first goal. What were we for the second one? 67th minute, yeah. So Josh Mullen had come on less than 5 minutes before, came on for Paul McMullen onto that right wing. And his corner is flicked on by Darragh O'Connor. And as Paul Hanlon then kind of sweeps that across. Alan, I banged on a lot last week about set pieces. I'm not going to claim any kind of foresight or anything there. I think, though, again, that is an element, though, of just using your strengths to your advantage.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Mullen is a very good crosser of the ball. He puts a ball in a dangerous area that is there to be attacked. O'Connor makes his kind of move at exactly the right time. Really good jump, and gets good ahead. And people are following up, which is what you want them doing. Say if that goal had been scored against us, I suspect we'd be talking about this for quite a while, about how you could argue Thistle defended it fairly poorly. They've got to do much better on the second ball. I'm glad they didn't. And then Hanlon scores probably the kind of goal you're actually wanting your number 9 scoring. That's where you want him coming in as well. He took it really well. It was a lovely finish, and just it came at a really, really good time because it kind of knocked the stuffing out of them a little bit and just gave us that kind of real belief that we could see out the last 20 minutes.
Felt a bit like looking at that Thistle side in the second half. I felt the opposite of ways I've felt about loads of Rovers teams, which was like looking at them across the board and thinking, we've actually got, we're much bigger than they are. Like when you look at the subs that they'd made by that point, at the point when that goal goes in, so they'd brought on Sean McArdle, Stephen Lawless, and Kyle Turner. It's like I think like the three of them would need to borrow like a big trench coat to get into like an adult film at the pictures. They already didn't have Lee Ashcroft there. And even like their fullbacks, like neither Paddy Redding or Ben McPherson are huge, big guys. So you're looking at like, Dan O'Reilly's decent in the air. Luke Macbeth's a big, monster. But like even like Tony Watt's not massive. Whereas, we're going into that and you've got Hanlon and O'Connor and Jack Hamilton's there. And Jordan Doherty's there, and it was nice just to see us actually kind of make that count. And I always good to see the set pieces go in. And as you say, it's a really decent finish from Paul Hanlon. Like very easy to snatch at that, and he just does exactly what he needs to do, just kind of steering it into the goal there. Ali, any thoughts on the goal?
No, I just have like my notes are very well worked, and that's pretty much it. It was kind of one off the training ground. Yeah, I thought when you watch the replay, Darrell O'Connor he reacts to it much quicker than his man, probably because he knows what's coming. He knows what what Millen's going to go for. But the Partick were very flat-footed, and I think Alan's right in terms of that goal knocked the stuff out of them because, like as you say, they brought on Lawless and Turner in particular to try and like get their foot on the ball and sort of really dominate the game. And basically, Lawless was starting to spread the odd pass, and then we went up that end and scored. So the timing of the goal was after they'd gone and shifted their system. I thought was crucial.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting the subs that they made as well, because even with Lawless coming on, who you'd always kind of think of as a winger, and Chalmers still being on the park, but it felt like they really narrowed in. Like they kind of decided that the way to get at us was through the middle, which, say they weren't getting much joy down the wings, but Ross Matthews and Sean Byrne just stood up to that. Again, even the second half, even late on when they had, you would expect them to have a lot of that pressure. It wasn't really translating into kind of actual chances. And again, I think those guys need a lot of credit for that. In terms of the Rover subs, so we also Callum Smith gone for the last kind of 15 minutes for Jack Hamilton. Looked like he maybe had a wee issue, maybe one just to keep an eye on. And then same again for Dylan Easton, who just was a bit of bother with his ankle. Now, when Easton went off, there's still 5 minutes left to play, and Jay Rowe was coming on. I really thought at that point, like, oh no, like he's chucking this. He's going like
Going to the back
more so. Just from like a bad juju point of view, rather than like an actual like footballing standpoint. Just like no, you can't go back. Never go back. But again, to credit Barry Robson, he didn't just put Jay Rowe on at right wing, and obviously you've got the added factor of you've only got 5 minutes to see out. He knows he can just drop right back and cover a man, and he's effectively going to end up in a 5 at points. But just the kind of ideologically, I'm putting him on at right wing. Like that's all I needed to see. I was kind of delighted with that, and again, it just gives you that bit of extra height as well, which we know obviously is a big advantage, especially when you're just trying to see out a game like that.
Yeah, it's slightly worrying when you see Dylan Easton going down like that, and having to go off and get treatment. But the encouraging thing for me was the look of outrage on his face when he saw the number 23 on the board that Mac held up. He, as far as he was concerned, he was fine. He didn't want to come off. To be fair, Dylan Easton is like that. He would play on with an injury. So, sometimes you need to kind of do what's best for him and get him off. When you're 2-0 up with 5 minutes to go, do not risk your best player. Like, it's as simple as that.
Because he'd been kidding on for 5 minutes that he was fine before the first time he needed treatment. Yeah, it was really innocuous. He actually jumped for a header. The ball went over his head. And it was just when he landed, you could see that he just came down badly on his ankle.
Yeah.
But then in one of the highlights, again, possibly it's Ben McPherson. It looks like it's the kind of thing that in a game that Thistle won 2-0, they'd have been clipping and putting on Twitter, because McPherson, I think, is he cuts inside him and Easton basically falls to the floor. And it is one where you'd be like, "Wait, look, he's done him." And it's just Easton's like, this ankle's not great. Like, not totally sold on this. And I think he still does a couple of minutes before he goes off. But absolutely. Just the kind of sensible thing to do. And Josh Mullen ends up at left wing, because I think we're just determined. We're just going to see Josh Mullen play every single position that we can. I was listening to the pre-match, and Les's first clue about all these different positions that he's played, like Josh Mullen, crossed my mind. It's like, he's every chance he's done all of these. Definitely, like this season alone, he's done left back, right wing, left wing. Popped up at number 10 at one point, like all over the place. But again, just like a really good player for a game like that. I thought Josh Mullen did exactly the job he was needing to do in that game. So just to kind of start, one last question in terms of the actual kind of the game itself. Was there any point in that last kind of 5-10 minutes, Ally, that you were concerned that Thistle were about to kind of really up the dial, or was that pretty comfortable?
No, I was actually like quietly confident, weirdly confident that we were going to see it out. It's a strange feeling as a Rovers fan to not have the fear, but one of the reasons is because with about 10-15 minutes to go, I thought Tony Watt's head went. He was like having afters with Josh Ray, bumping into players. So that kind of helped, because that frustration was really seeping into the Partick team. I mean, when they took McPherson off, because he'd sent a few crosses in that he'd overhit every single one. When they took him off, he booted the advertising board and sat down in a hump. And I kind of thought at that point, we've got it won, as long as we didn't, I don't know, throw a J-Row shaped grenade onto the pitch. So no, I thought we saw the game out really well. We kept it solid. We allowed them maybe a bit of the ball, but I never at any point thought they were going to break us down and create a clear-cut chance.
Yeah, we maybe got a wee bit fortunate that walking jinx Alex Samuel was injured last week, because otherwise I think we would have seen him for the last 20 minutes or whatever, and we would have all been terrified. Because you're right.
I might have even noticed them coming on. I don't know if you caught that during the game. When I was sitting there going, number 23? Where the hell did he come from? And I actually went in Thistles. I was like, oh, they subbed him on right after we scored. So I was too busy making sure I was playing the right music and cheering on. Totally didn't notice him coming on.
I tell you, it was literally right as we scored, because when the linesman put up his flag to say, right, they want to make a substitution, it was close enough to the goal that I worried that he was flagging about the goal. Like I think the Rovers players were still celebrating, and he had the flag up to say, right, Thistle want to make a sub. Because I couldn't work out who'd gone off for a couple of minutes. And normally what I would do is check the chat to see if you'd put it in, because you've already announced it. But I thought, you didn't, so there's no point in that. So in terms of to kind of take us back to where we started, really, Alan, taking the 90 minutes as a whole, last week we were very down on Barry Robson. I don't think there's any getting away from that. And I think we were certainly we were bordering on mutiny, I think. Maybe as a support, more than just you and me and the other two who were on with us. Was that yesterday? Was that what we needed to see from Barry Robson?
It was a start. Is in the same way that, you know, I wasn't starting to doubt whether Barry Robson should continue as Rovers manager on the basis of one performance against Dunfermline. It was building up. You know, one good performance against Thistle's not enough for me to say, right, we've definitely turned the corner. We absolutely need to follow up with another good performance and win against a Morton team who are, you know, very much hurting from a bit of a doing yesterday. And who, you know, Dougie Emery's starting to come under a wee bit of pressure. They are also due to go on their winter unbeaten run, so hopefully that doesn't start next week. So I think, you know, following it up with another good win and performance next week, we'll start to kind of relax a little bit and be kind of going into games with a bit more confidence. Just unfortunately, the game after that, hardly anyone's going to get to bloody go to it.
Yeah, that was one thing when everybody was up in arms last week. I thought, well, at least if we do get beat the next 2 games in a row, there's a better chance I might get a ticket to Lesser Hampden. But yeah, maybe back on the wait list for that again now. Ally, man of the match. So Scott Brown got it in the ground. So first of all, I mean, are you largely prepared to attribute that to the role that he was asked to play versus recently? And also, any thoughts on alternatives or contenders?
I mean, to be fair, Scott Brown had a good game, so I've got no problem with him being picked as man of the match. Maybe a wee bit of a statement to say, yeah, that's good, we like that. Put him in that position next week. More of that, please, from the match sponsors. If I was picking, I probably would have picked Paul Hanlon. Or I thought Darren O'Connor had a very good game at centre back alongside him. The difference being that Paul Hanlon got the goal. I thought they were both very solid. And I suppose we can come back to, but one to throw out there is, do we think O'Connor is better than Fordyce in the back 4 system? If that's the way to go?
I think it's a very good question. Question I should have asked. It's really difficult, because personally, if I couldn't pick between the two. I never would have dropped Callum Fordyce out for Darragh O'Connor, and I don't think Darragh O'Connor's done anything spectacular since then, even with his assist, that would sort of justify it in retrospect. But by the same token, now that Darragh O'Connor's in the team, there's not enough to then kind of bring Callum Fordyce back in. But really in the sense that, because they're both good, they're just, I think they're both been obviously O'Connor's a small sample size, but even in that game we get beat by Dunfermline, I didn't think he did badly at all. I thought he actually was one of the better players we had. But they look very, very similar to me as well. So it's not just that you're going, right, they're both playing really well, but one of them gives you this and the other one gives you that. Actually, they look fairly similar to me in that respect as well. Alan, have you got a stronger, better opinion on that?
No, I genuinely, what I was thinking before you said it was, he didn't necessarily deserve to come in, only in the sense that Fordyce didn't deserve to be dropped. But yeah, he's done well enough since he's got in that, you know, he certainly doesn't deserve to be dropped. I think what he does give you is, I think he's a bit more athletic than Callum Fordyce. Now, you know, compared to me, Callum Fordyce is like, you know, it's like prime Daley Thompson. Like, let's not kid ourselves. But I think just on the basis that he's a good bit younger, he's, you know, maybe a wee bit taller and narrower. He's got different things there, and I think, especially when you've got another good defender outside him in Jordan Doherty, I think he's got attributes there that I think maybe Callum Fordyce doesn't. Callum Fordyce almost certainly has attributes that he doesn't as well. So it's Barry Robson's got to choose what he's looking for. I think for me, Fordyce is at his best in the centre of a back 3, and I don't want to see a back 3. So whether that or not. But having said that, if he played a back 4 next week and Fordyce was back in there, other than being confused at what Darrell O'Connor had done to be dropped, I would be perfectly satisfied seeing him in there.
Yeah, it's a nice position to be in, and I don't think we necessarily need to be, really terrified that we've got an extra defender on the bench who's good. Like, sometimes I think we're too used to not having like any viable options on the bench, that because we've got one, we're like, oh god, this doesn't feel right. Like, that's just a really good advantage. That's something that we should have. We're lucky to have. Actually, Thistle, I think, are the obvious comparison. So they lost Lee Ashcroft last week. They've been playing Dan O'Reilly and Lee Ashcroft as a really, really solid defensive pairing. But Lee Ashcroft drops out. They've then got to go for Luke Macbeth, who's kind of a part-time centre-half. He's obviously comfortable in the midfield as well. And then beyond that, I think they're going to a lad who's 18, who I do not know the name of, and who hasn't basically played any football at all. Whereas, we've got actual viable full-time centre-half options, and probably beyond that, we could probably, touch wood, this doesn't happen, lose 2 and still be absolutely fine. So it's tough that Callum Fordyce is sitting out. I wonder if it's maybe just a simple squad management thing, where Barry Robson is just going, look, these 2 guys are broadly the same, and actually it's not fair that Darrell O'Connor has had to not play any football whatsoever for a couple of months, and we're playing badly and I can change something and it just makes sense. And actually it's just a case of, because we were in a bad mood last week, I think I quite sneeringly said, I asked Blair if it was change for change's sake, but maybe it is, and that's not a bad thing. Don't know. But it'd be interesting to see how that kind of develops over the next few weeks. Alan, anyone else for man of the match beyond kind of Scott Brown, Paul Hanlon?
Yeah, I mean, potentially going for Paul Hanlon myself as well. Actually, I thought, I've mentioned them already, I thought Jordan Doherty once again was just fantastic. Like, he's just his nutmeg was just, Cameron was actually sat down kind of behind me in the box at the time. He wasn't watching the game at that point, and he's just like, what's happened? Just because of the noise that I made, it was just it was one of those moments. And then to see it on the Twitter today, it was just, it was brilliant. Some of the reaction to it as well. One guy I saw somebody, a Thistle fan, had retweeted it, calling us classless. It's like, why would you? It's like,
love that.
Really? All the tweets we've put out since the game, you think that's the one that's classless? Really?
Just like, that's just football, man. That was just a thing that happened during a game of football. There's no, you can't take issue to that. That's the thing we're all, there to see. I'm
assuming it was the mention of. I'm sure it was the mention of. It was Fitzpatrick, wasn't it? And
Fitzpatrick,
and his, saying this is what he was seeing in his sleep. But even then, I'm pretty sure if Aidan Fitzpatrick's seen that, he's not really bothered. Other than the fact he got nutmegged, and his teammates have probably absolutely ribbed him about it.
Aidan Fitzpatrick's doing that to people 4 times more often than it happens to him, and I think although it's from behind, you can see it in his body language. You can see he's just that, like, I've been done there. And I think there's an element of, like, this is a defender who's, out of his lane. Like, he'll be getting a nosebleed up here, and then you just like, whoop, whoop, away he goes.
Nutmegs are always great, but it's the way that he did it as well, the way he kind of flick and turn. It was incredible.
Because I think the thing is, it takes everybody, because as soon as he's going away from goal, you're like, right, this ball's going, 10 yards back up the line to somebody else, and they'll recycle it, and it's just away you go. Like, really just so good. And I think sometimes, not to give it more importance than it actually has, but sometimes I think you need that. Sometimes you need that when you've not been playing well, and when everybody is in that kind of bad mood and everybody's kind of negative, you just need a wee bit of swagger for somebody, just to be like, no, we're still pretty good at this, by the way. Lovely to see.
Or you slide in and wipe out the goalie.
Yeah, exactly. classless.
On Jordan Doherty, is he out of contract at the end of the season? And if he is, we really need to slap a new one on him because he could absolutely step up a level.
Oh, well, Davey mentioned that in the interview, didn't he?
Yeah,
I think he's been our best player by a fair margin this season.
Yeah,
and he's the one who. You were talking about Paul McMullen earlier, and you're saying he didn't have a great game. He's not been on kind of brilliant form. But I think a large part of that you can attribute to the fact he's being asked to do different things. Where sometimes he's playing centrally, sometimes he's playing wide, sometimes he's playing up front. And that's difficult to adjust. Whereas Jordan Doherty seems to it doesn't faze him at all. He gets asked to do different jobs all the time, and he still just looks great. That is absolutely just strolling it. Quite literally at times. Other one I just wanted to mention there is just Dylan Easton. Purely because he's just, the very definition of Dylan Easton doing Dylan Easton things. But still, you should still be in the conversation. Don't want to take him for granted entirely. I think he needs to be out on the left-hand side. And I understand that in a lot of senses, he's probably the best option in that kind of number 10. He's probably got more of the attributes you would want from a number 10 than anybody else does. I just think he needs to be on that left-hand side. He's too dangerous. Right backs can't live with him. And I think that setup yesterday was the best way to go. Take your next best pick and just let Dylan Easton do that on that left-hand side.
And if he's at 10, he's going to end up out there anyway, so just play him out there.
Aye, that's it. And sometimes I think you can do that. Notably, Ian Murray did it at Tannadice when Easton scored that goal from the right-hand side of the box, where I think if you'd drawn that out, he was supposed to be playing the left-hand side, but he was actually just going wherever. But obviously the rest of the structure was there to allow that, which is kind of what we've been lacking over the last few weeks. I think that's I've not got anything else for that game itself. Just a thoroughly enjoyable afternoon. Really, I mean, obviously I kind of alluded to it at the start there. Like, genuinely, I think quite pleased to have some of that thrown back at us. I don't take back anything we said last week. I don't think anything we said last week was necessarily wrong or even really an overreaction as such. I think it was all based on what we'd seen. It was all based on the evidence in front of us. And for my own part, I didn't think we'd see as big a change from Barry Robson as we did. I just thought we'd get kind of broadly more of the same kind of tenets in his approach. But he changed what he needed to change. And whether that was that was a Thistle thing, or whether it's something we'll see more of in the coming weeks, I don't know. But it was enough to get him another couple of weeks, put it that way. We'll see what happens next week. I still think he has the kind of PR issue and all that kind of stuff. He almost needs to overperform compared to like other managers, how other managers would. But there was a lot more to like about that performance yesterday than I thought we would see, actually. And I'm glad that you get the result to go along with it. Because as I said before, see, roughly about half an hour in, when the game started to turn a bit, I kind of thought that we were going to end up doing this podcast, having get beat 1-0 just to like a bit of bad luck.
Yeah.
But then be arguing the same points to say, no, I actually think he set us up okay, but then it went against us, but then is it too late anyway, and all that kind of stuff. So really pleased that we get the result to go with the performance, and we'll see how that takes us into next week. Just one final point before we go. There was the Scottish Cup draw this evening. So the Rovers are at home to Alloa in the third round of the Scottish Cup. Alan, not the very best draw, not the very worst either.
No, I mean they're going okay this year. I obviously played them in a pre-season friendly and kind of strolled it really, but it was a pre-season friendly. Happy to get a home draw. Happy for it not to be a championship team. A more than decent chance of getting through to the next round, which is all ultimately you really want from it. Yeah, it'd have been great to have a trip away to a wee dodgy non-league ground or something like that, just somewhere you've never been, or alternatively maybe a wee trip up to see the Hedge at Brecon. We've not been there for a while, but it's not an exciting draw, but hopefully it's a right. Get in the next round and get down the road kind of draw. That's perfectly acceptable.
Yeah. Would have been nicer to have it away just for you and me, Alan. A slightly shorter drive to a game for a change. That would have been nice.
But, absolutely, yeah.
Ali, you content home draw, lower league opposition?
Yeah, I think like everybody wants a nice away day in the Scottish Cup, but I think if we can just get through the next round, that's fine. I'm not gonna lose any sleep over the fact that it's Alloa at home. I'm not gonna get excited for it either, but it's fine. Yeah, it's fine.
I've not had too many home draws recently, so can't complain when they do come on.
I do wonder, will he use some of the fringe players in the game at all? That's one question I would maybe have. Maybe we'll see some of the.
I would argue, I'd argue getting through is too important to do that.
Yeah,
budget wise, getting through and getting a decent. You want to go as far as you can in the competition. If we could get through 2 or 3 lower league teams in a row, that'd be fantastic. Get to the semi-final without playing a team above League One would be brilliant. It's not going to happen, but ultimately the kind of second best thing to getting through is getting a draw that's going to make us some money. So get past this stage, the big boys come in, then.
I wonder.
Yeah, it's just actually when are these games played? When is it?
29th of November.
Okay.
If you look
there's
a gap in the league about then, so 29th of November.
Yeah. So that's coming too soon for the likes of your Richard Chins, but it's maybe without you're not talking about bringing in guys who've not kicked a ball yet, but gives you a chance for a bit of kind of rotation. A guy like a Callum Smith, who is quality. He's not untested. We'll give him some minutes. Excellent. Right, that was good. It's nice when we don't have to go for 2 hours because we're all too het up about something. Thank you, everybody, once again for tuning in. Enjoy the first half of your week. We will be back on Wednesday or Thursday to look ahead to next week's game against Morton and see what that might bring. Thank you for joining me, gents. I will speak to you soon. Goodbye.